Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Shoemaker, and for the next couple class periods, I will be guiding you through some lectures and some hands on activities with population viability analysis. But first, before we delve into the fun stuff, let's just talk a little bit about what population viability analysis is. Population viability analysis has been around in conservation biology pretty much from the beginning. Now, conservation biologists deal with rare species, and rare species are not always that easy to deal with. One thing you cannot do with rare species is do experiments. It is not that easy to say, okay, we're going to take several populations, we'll do one management activity with one population. We'll try something else here. We'll try something else over there. Sometimes you only have one and it's very small and you don't want to mess with it. So one way we can get around that issue is to use computer models to ask what if questions. We don't have to run experiments on real systems. We can use computers and we can use models to ask questions like, what if we do management action type A? What if we do improve habitat? Or what if we enact harvest regulations? What is the likely future going to look like for this species? So models, from the very beginning, conservation biologists realized that we need these models to understand our systems, to formalize our assumptions about our systems, and to understand how management and conservation could be used to most effectively manage these populations. Now we're going to get into a little math, so just don't be too afraid of the math. The math is not that scary. It's not that difficult, but it's important. And, in ecology and conservation, math is critical. It's critical to be able to speak that language. Charles Darwin once said, mathematics seems to endow one with something like a new sense. It really is kind of like an additional sense that we can put all what we know together into a single model, but we really are not that great as humans at integrating all this information and understanding what the implications of all this information is for the future. Mathematical models give us the ability to predict the future based on what we know and to understand the implications of the assumptions that we're imposing on the system. So hopefully this will all become clearer as we go through this short course. I will minimize my video here and then we can move into the lecture. All right, so here we are, and this is, again, you should have access to this website so you can go at your own pace and go through the content. It's online, it's available to you. So I just introduced the concept. PVA, population viability analysis, is a set of practical approaches to problem solving in conservation and wildlife management via creative, and I really would like to emphasize the creativity involved. That is one thing humans are really good at. We're pretty good at problem solving. We're good at finding creative solutions. We're just not that great at putting all this information together and understanding the implications. Computers are much better at doing that. So there's this beautiful marriage between human capabilities and computer capabilities, which I think really is kind of a beautiful thing. And hopefully that'll become clearer through this short course. So practical set of approaches for problem solving in conservation and wildlife management via creative application of demographic theory, simulation models, and statistics. All right. Throughout the short course, we're going to use hands-on activities as much as possible to explore the fundamentals of population viability analysis. To do the hands-on activities, we're going to use Insight Maker, which is a free web-based system for modeling complex systems. I already made a short video, actually not that short, I think it's almost half an hour long, to introduce Insight Maker and to give you some, just a start. And we'll go through some examples throughout the short course as well. So the first thing we're going to do, and that's what we're getting started with now, is just run through the real basics of population ecology, population modeling, especially as it relates to wildlife conservation. Second, we're going to build our first PVA, which involves using real data on the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. And we're going to ask some questions about the future of the Yellowstone grizzly bears at the national park. And we will finish the short course by building another population viability analysis, this time for the loggerhead sea turtle, Caretta caretta. And that is based on a paper, a very well-known paper and highly influential paper by Crowder et al. In 1994, which we will provide on Web Campus. All right, so before we get into the really fun stuff, all this, the actual PVAs, both of these, the grizzly bear and the sea turtle PVAs, will be based on real data and have real world importance. But before we do that, let's start really simple and just describe the basics of population ecology. Now, I teach a whole class in population ecology. We're not going to go through everything. Some of you are already in my class, so you please help out your classmates if you are in my class and already know Insight Maker really well and know how to build these population models and use these models. So, what is a population? Let's start at the real basics. What's a population? Well, there's a lot of definitions out there, but I like Charles Krebs' definition from 1972. A group of organisms, a population is a group of organisms of the same species occupying a particular space at a particular time with the potential to breed with each other. So I think that gets all the key points in. It's group of the same species, and they have to have some possibility of breeding with one another in order to be characterized as being part of the same population. Now, defining a population is not always straightforward. We don't always know where one population ends and another population begins. Sometimes the habitat is contiguous, and of course, if you have a contiguous habitat, say across the entire Great Basin, you wouldn't expect an individual at one end near Salt Lake City or something to be able to breed with an individual closer to Reno. That wouldn't really make sense. But where does the population begin and where does it end? That's not always super clear. It's something that we have to define as conservation biologists, as managers, as population ecologists. All right. How do populations change over time? So now that we've defined a population, more or less, how do they change over time? Well, populations of living things have the power to grow exponentially. There should be a picture of a giant puffball here, but I don't know where it went. But picture a giant puffball. Now, this is a kind of interesting example because they have a very unique life history, puffballs. They can produce 7 trillion offspring in one reproductive event. 7 trillion is a very large number. How many zeros is that? Well, you have 6 zeros for a million, 9 zeros for a billion. So we're talking 12 zeros for a trillion. So that's a lot of zeros. That's a lot of offspring. Now, if all those offspring reached adulthood successfully, the descendants from just 2 parent puffballs would weigh more than the entire planet in 2 generations. That is the power of life. Life has the power to grow exponentially. What do we mean? Well, more individuals you have in a population, the greater potential to produce new individuals, because each individual can produce a certain number of individuals. The more individuals in there, the more total input, the more total potential for growth the population has. And then as the population gets even bigger, it gets even more potential for growth. And so it's kind of this runaway positive feedback process that we call exponential growth, and that all life has potential for exponential growth. So that is the very basic concept of population ecology. We'll talk a little bit more about what can regulate runaway exponential growth, but I won't do that right now. But every population has the capability to grow exponentially with adequate resources. But what if the population gets so big that individuals are competing with each other for food and they're not able to get enough resources? Then the growth rate goes down, and that's called population regulation. Okay, so I fixed the website, and without further ado, the giant puffball. Pretty impressive organism, no? Ecologists and conservation biologists have known for years how important models are to our discipline, to be able to ask what-if questions, to be able to do experiments on systems that just aren't amenable to experimentation. But really, in recent years, with the advent of really fast computers, high processing computers, cloud computing, things are exploding in the modeling world, and as it relates to conservation biology and ecology, but almost every other discipline as well. Computer models are becoming more and more essential to productivity in science and other aspects of life. And so I like to say that when you are armed with just a little knowledge of computer programming and how computers work in general, it gives you an enormous power to answer questions, to do experiments that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And it's really, it is very empowering. So I encourage all of you to gain some skills with computer programming. Now, Insight Maker is basically a computer programming language. I like to think of it as a sneaky computer programming language because it's visual, it's intuitive, but it's super powerful. So hopefully, even by just getting a little experience doing modeling in Insight Maker, it will really hit home to you what you can do with these kind of models. So yeah, I think it opens up worlds in terms of what we can do to ask questions about what the future might look like under scenario A, scenario B, whether that scenario is climate change, whether it's habitat manipulation, harvest regulation. And so in this short course, obviously we can't do that much, but we're going to do some hands-on computer simulation to try to understand how to manage and conserve natural populations. We'll start really, really simple with Insight Maker models that are not necessarily that realistic, and we'll quickly build up to complex simulation models. So I already made a video that goes through Insight Maker as the platform just to get you started with it. It's a web-based visual programming language for complex systems modeling, which is what we're doing. Any dynamic system essentially consists of stocks and flows, and stocks are just containers that hold stuff, and flows are the processes by which the stuff can enter a stock or leave a stock. A stock can only change by flows. If a stock doesn't have flows, it won't change. So here we have a stock that is representing a population of moose and two flows. One flow representing the total births into the moose population, and one flow representing the total deaths from the moose population. Now, the births come directly from the ether, the background, and enter the population, and deaths are, when the individuals in the stock are just, you have a flow that goes nowhere. It goes into the ether, and that's representing deaths in this case. If the flow is larger, if the flow in is larger than the flow out, then the stock increases over time. If the flow out is larger than the flow in, obviously the stock decreases over time. And if they're equal, if the births and the death are equal, then you have a stable population, and that has a special name. It is called an equilibrium. All right, so I will stop here, and we'll pick up with an a basic insight maker population model.